The first duty of government is to protect our rights.
It's our job to maintain the proper role of government in what we were tasked to do.
Obviously, we over budgeted last year. I hate to say that I was right, but I was right. So.
And I think that that's what we need to look at more, is trying to get back to what we used to be, where our churches and our families took care of each other instead of relying on the state.
And we have no way to maintain control over the spending of this program, and it will be a disaster for this state long term.
But we have a whole gamut of kids whose parents would like to do something for them and they cannot.
I take our constitutional rights, the constitutional rights of my constituents, very seriously.
This is simply about putting it out of reach of young, innocent, vulnerable children and making our libraries and schools a safe place for them to go.
And I am increasingly frustrated that we cannot stop ourselves from drinking at the public trough.
He's sounding the alarm. He's saying if we don't address these issues, we potentially might have greater problems moving forward.
Mr. Speaker, no matter how you look at it, no matter how you boil this down, there is never any time that a parent's right to govern what their children see and what they're exposed to should ever be bypassed.
If I was looking at a business and I was looking at these figures, there would be heads rolling because this is unsustainable.
We're supposed to be bottom-up government. We're supposed to be representing my citizens' ideas and your citizens' ideas, and we're supposed to be discussing them and debating them to come to a conclusion.
We need to start making Idaho first. We need to start making America first.
We need to be protecting our First Amendment rights, not inventing ways to slowly chip away at them.
The First Amendment and our freedom of religion, freedom of speech are our first liberties. They are so important. We don't have the rest without them.
Well, good morning. Welcome to Idaho Signal. My name is Matt Edwards, and currently I am traveling, so this is not live. I'm not here right now, but what we have for you in store today is the presentation that happened in the House Revenue and Taxation Committee yesterday. This was a presentation on property tax, kind of a big overview of what property tax looks like here in Idaho. Every state is somewhat different, and so what goes on here in Idaho is covered in this presentation. We thought it was important to share this and make this available for you. It may not be the most riveting or entertaining thing in the world, but it's full of a lot of really good information because there's a lot of folks out there that don't quite understand how the property tax system works, including myself. And so the more we can learn about it, the more we can understand it, the more we can tackle it and try to figure out how to reduce it as much as possible or just eliminate it entirely. But we need to understand what it funds, how it's collected, and we need to know those things so we can in order to fix it. So I hope you take all of this in and then shoot me some of your ideas. Give us some of your thoughts on what you think is the best path forward. So still tongue-tied this week. It's been rough. Anyway, folks, we'll see you live here again tomorrow for the Friday show. But in the meantime, enjoy this presentation. We'll see you next time.
I will have to say here that I've been on this committee 5 years, and as a former county commissioner and working with property tax, I always learn something new. So it's great to have you with us. Please introduce yourself and who you represent, and the time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning. Good morning, representatives. My name is Kathleen Ireland. I'm the Property Tax Research Specialist with the Idaho State Tax Commission. Thank you for welcoming me here this morning. I'm here to talk to you just kind of an overall view of Idaho's property tax system with some updated data from last year's presentation. And a few of the items I'd like to discuss with you this morning are, certainly we'll start with the assessed values. looking at statewide numbers and the assessment process, which is the beginning of the property tax process in Idaho. We'll look at property tax budgets, how they're determined, limitations to those budgets, and then we'll look at property tax trends over many years in Idaho. We'll talk about the final numbers of House Bill 292 and 521 and the relief that those two bills provided. And we'll finish up with two of the property tax reduction programs that are longstanding in Idaho for your constituents and others. So as a property tax research specialist at the Tax Commission, I get a lot of phone calls from property owners regarding property tax questions. Certainly I don't get nearly as many questions as the assessor's offices and all of their staff, but it is nice to be able to interface with property owners. And at that time when they call, oftentimes I hear suggested comments that may be more myth than fact-based, perhaps something that they received from social media, something they received from their neighbors, and it's a great opportunity to provide some education on Idaho's property tax system at that time. And a few of the myths that I get regularly is, especially on who pays, oftentimes I'll have homeowners reach out to me and say, you know, this really isn't fair. I'm a homeowner. I pay all the property tax. No one else pays property tax in Idaho. And if we look at the 2024 data, we see that primary residences, meaning that those are homes that are owner occupied, receiving the homeowner's exemption, they're without relief in 2024, they would have paid 47.8% of all property taxes levied in Idaho. If we couple that with all other residential properties, meaning second homes, rentals, up to fourplexes, all considered residential, the combination of that would have paid 71.3% of all property taxes in Idaho. Excuse me, the 71.3 is after relief, if I might make that clear. So another myth that I hear is who spends it? Oftentimes I'll hear property owners say, I don't have children, I'm paying for schools. Schools are the only ones who spend property tax dollars. And if we look at the 2024 data, following the relief afforded from House Bill 521, we see that schools paid or utilized 20% of their budgets for property tax, from property tax. Thirdly, another myth that I receive is the sources of income to local governments. Oftentimes I'll hear that local governments are only funded through property tax, and therefore the complaints I hear is, I saw a new park bench, that wasn't necessary, why are they spending my property tax dollars on such things? And if we look at the most recent census data, fiscal year 2022, looking at all revenue sources to local governments, we see that property taxes typically make up about 24% of local government budgets in Idaho. The myth I hear most often is usually around the time that assessment notices are mailed out to property owners, which is by the first Monday in June, I hear property owners suggest that, you know, my assessment went up again this year. That's completely unfair. It shouldn't go up every year. And their assessors are only doing this because they want more money. And I hope that my presentation today will alleviate a lot of those fears. Certainly, Idaho has a budget-driven property tax system, and the value that the assessors quantify is utilized in the levy calculation as the denominator. The numerator, the driving force of those levy rates, are the budgets of the taxing districts. Again, Idaho has a budget-driven property tax system. So when we look to statute, of course, the assessment of property is number one in our property tax system. The assessors have to go out and annually assess all parcels in their jurisdiction. This is according to section 63-205. County assessors will value local properties of real and personal in nature. So that could be anything from a mobile home up to an industrial complex and the personal property of the equipment inside that industrial complex. The Tax Commission is the assessor for utility properties. And of course, utility properties are barge lines, pipelines, telecommunications, electric utilities, railroads, etc. When we look at statute again, all assessors are required to appraise properties every year or index annually. Assessors are on a 5-year reappraisal cycle, meaning they need to field inspect every parcel in their jurisdiction at least once every 5 years. Certainly, they're going out in their various neighborhoods much more often than that. but they will field inspect 20% roughly of all the parcels in their jurisdiction annually. That other 80% also is required by statute to be annually assessed to market value. And we utilize statistical analysis based on the data that the assessor's offices are able to gather and come up with median rates to look at that level of assessment to be at market value. So by statute, 63208 states that our lien date is January 1 of every year. And by that lien date, the assessor must assess to market value. In 2024, the total assessed value statewide in Idaho was $363 billion. This was only about a 6% increase over 2023. In 2023, we had $342.9 billion statewide. That was just about a little over a 3% increase over 2022. So values had really kind of stagnated or stabilized at that point, if you will. If you remember, back just after COVID, between 21 and 22, that's when we had this amazing increase in value statewide in Idaho. In fact, in that 1 year, values increased over $110 billion in 1 year, with a 47.7% increase in assessed value. That, of course, we had a lot of people moving in, a lot of immigration in Idaho at that time, a lot of remote workers, and values, with interest rates being incredibly low as well. So my next slide here is, this is a 15-year look back at values, assessed values over time, starting in 2009. We see as the market declined in that 2010 and 11 window, values went down in the residential sector. Most other sectors remained relatively stable. And then starting in 2013, 14, values started to rise. In the last 7 years, values have gone up dramatically in the residential sector. That's that top line is specific to residential. That second line down there is the commercial sector. We see in the last several years, commercial has gone up a bit, but nothing near the residential sector. So what's interesting about this slide to me is that, again, the assessment of property is a data-driven system. Assessors require data to be able to come up with the market value that's required by statute. So when we look at our ratio studies, just for review, or if this is unfamiliar for some of you, every year the Tax Commission performs a ratio study on all assessors' assessments throughout Idaho, all 44 counties, as long as we have the data to quantify a statistical review of that. Once we go out, we have a group of folks that actually go out and interface with the assessor's office and collect the data and then quantify the statistics. The total number of sales we received in the last ratio study, which we do every year, was about 26,000 sales statewide. Of that, the sales that we gathered were 25,000 were in the residential sector. We only had about 524 sales in the commercial sector. And I believe that directly impacts this slide that we're looking at here. The reality is that sales information is rarely disclosed, especially in the commercial sector, to our assessing officers. And so it's very difficult when you have such a huge margin, the delta between what we're receiving for residential sector and what we're receiving for the commercial sector, to really understand what the true market value is of the commercial properties in those more robust markets that we have throughout Idaho. And so due to the limited data that we receive, I believe this truly influences. So again, property taxes in Idaho, as we'll talk about throughout this presentation, is a zero-sum game. If one sector has the lion's share of the value and increases at a more rapid rate than other sectors within that geographic area, then they will take the lion's share of the property tax as well. So, and I think we see that in this graph. So once assessed values are completely quantified and reviewed by the boards of equalization of the many counties within Idaho, all 44, those values are approved and equalized by the boards of equalization. Then we move into the budgeting process by all the taxing districts. And just for review, we have the property tax levy rate calculation in this slide. So every taxing district in July holds their, that are required by law, holds their public hearings, and then they present their budgets, and then from their property tax budget portion, we will quantify the levy rate for the property tax bills of individual properties. So how this process works is each taxing district will have an overall total budget that's inclusive of all revenue sources. To quantify a property tax levy rate, first we must remove all other revenue sources, whether that's fees, grants, intergovernmental revenue sharing, all of that needs to be removed. So we whittle that down just to the property tax portion of each taxing district's budget. So once we get down to that which is required of property tax, we will take that property tax budget quantity and divide it by the net taxable value of all the parcels within the geographic boundary of that taxing district. Okay, and the difference between market value and net taxable value, of course, is just any applicable exemption that needs to be removed from that market value. So the net taxable value of the parcels is basically the value that the parcel owner will be paying property taxes on. So once we take the property tax budget divided by the net taxable value within that district, we come up with a proportional amount, that percentage that budget relates to overall value in that district. And that's the rate then that is applied back to every parcel within that tax code area, that taxing district's boundary, and quantifies then an individual tax bill. So here are the other revenue sources that taxing districts are generally afforded. Again, I'm looking at fiscal year 2022 from census. So we see here that property taxes, again, are about 24% of taxing districts' overall budget, but charges, fees, grants, anything that they're charging to their clients is about 30%. Intergovernmental revenue sharing is going to be about another 45%. So we can see from this graph that property tax is more of a minimal revenue source for those taxing districts. For this slide, I wanted to just reinforce a little bit of that relationship between budget, property tax budget quantity, and value. And we could see here in this hypothetical that we have a taxing district with a budget of roughly $55,000. Over 3 years, that budget remained relatively unchanged. But values have continued to rise, just as they have in Idaho recently. So the result of that is, of course, the levy rate precipitously dropping. And we have seen that across Idaho. Levy rates are going down at a rapid rate. At this time because values are increasing. Budgets, in this example, budgets remained unchanged, but of course, budgets in our real world are quite constrained by statutory limitations. And so with those incredible increases in value, we're seeing levy rates throughout Idaho diminish. So then looking specifically at the budgets of taxing districts, most taxing districts' budgets are non-exempt funds. This is their general operations funds. Non-exempt means that they are not exempt from the limitations found in statute, specifically section 63-802. So the increases that they are allowed as non-exempt funds, certainly they're allowed to take a 3% growth rate over the highest of their last 3 years. If they have new construction within their district, or annexation within their district, they can take a 90% quantity of that value, multiply it by a preliminary levy rate to come up with a budget allowance, a capacity increase based on that value and preliminary levy rate. Those three items are limited to not allow a taxing district's property tax budget to increase any more than 8%. If they had additional new construction that could have been converted into a budget capacity, that is no longer legal, and they are limited at that 8%. That is just dismissed. Same with the annexation. So those three items cannot exceed. If a taxing district decided to take their full 3% increase, they would be limited to taking no more than an additional 5% budget capacity due to new construction and annexation. Beyond that 8% limit, additional allowances for increasing budget capacity would be if a urban renewal revenue allocation area was to terminate, the increment value would be utilized as new construction, multiplied by a preliminary levy rate, restricted to only 80% of that, and that would be utilized as budget capacity increase. In the rare occasion, that doesn't happen all the time, certainly. It's more rare. Plus, a taxing district may utilize foregone to increase their budget capacity, but again, that's limited as well. So a taxing district may use 1% of accrued foregone. Again, foregone is legal budget capacity that the taxing district could have used in the past. That was absolutely an allowance that was legal to them to take their maximum budget. But they chose not to. They chose to take something less, and as long as that was a legal quantity of budget capacity, they could have foregone that, banked it for future use. So now to use that foregone, that is limited to just 1%, which adds to the base budget of foregone. If they have additional capital improvements, they can temporarily take an additional 3%, but again, that does not add to the base budget. So that is a temporary utilization of any foregone amounts banked. All of these are possible as long as those taxing districts' levy rates do not reach and hit a levy rate maximum found in statute as well. So as we've seen, especially with that previous graph, values are increasing like crazy. We know levy rates are going down. So we have not seen a taxing district hit a levy rate limit since the time of 2008 to 2012, when the market really went down due to the housing crisis and recessionary times. But there are many taxing districts have, in addition to budgetary increases, levy rate caps as well.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes, question.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I'd like to ask a question, if I could, on this slide.
Yes, Ms. Ireland. Question.
Ms. Ireland, could you tell me how the preliminary levy rate is determined?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Cheatham, it is a complicated process, but I would love to try. So the preliminary levy rate is basically looking at, if I may back up just a second. So previously, taxing districts would just utilize the last year's levy rate to quantify the budget capacity increase for new construction or annexation. And so when I talk about a capacity increase, what we would take is the value of the properties that were newly constructed. We would take that assessed value and multiply it by last year's levy rate. So as an example, say there's $10,000 in new construction. So we would take 90% of that, $9,000. And then we would multiply that by a levy rate to come up with a dollar amount of capacity increase in that budget. So if the levy rate was 0.5%, which is generally the statewide average, little more, a little less right now, that would be roughly $45. That would add to the budget capacity of that district. So that was previously to House Bill 389. We utilized the previous year's levy rate. Currently, now, we use the current assessed value, the net taxable value, plus, I believe, last year's budget, and then we would add to that net taxable value a portion for operating property as well. And then we would calculate out a levy rate utilizing two different data points from two different years. So last year's budget divided by current value that was on the abstract from the county would then calculate out a preliminary levy rate that we would utilize in the calculation of current budget capacity increase. Does that help?
Good. Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Sarling.
You're welcome. I'm sorry, it is a complicated topic.
And also on that.
Another question, Representative Gannon.
Hey, thank you, Mr. Chairman and Ms. Ireland. So, as I'm understanding what you just said, you get the levy rate based on the taxable amount of property, and the corollary to that is if one property doesn't pay, then the levy rate will go up a little bit. The rest of us will all pay if one property does not pay. Would that be right?
Ms. Ireland?
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative
Because
Gannon.
of an exemption, it does not pay. Not just doesn't want to pay, but has an exemption.
Sure. So if I may mirror that back to you, if someone isn't exempt, is exempt. We're talking about tax shifting then, of course. So yes, absolutely. If a property is exempted, then it's removed from the net taxable value in the denominator of that levy rate calculation. So that budget is what we're really solving for. That percentage calculation is really what percentage is all the people remaining within that denominator. How much will they be paying of their value to satisfy the budget of that taxing district? So that percentage that's calculated then is only applied to those that remain. And so because that budget is the annual budget, it needs to be paid by those who are left. So that property that was exempted and pulled out of that net taxable value in the denominator, then their tax burden is now shifted to those that remain. So yes, sir, you're exactly right.
Is there a follow-up, Representative Gannon?
No, I think.
Okay. Representative Birch?
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I actually have a follow-up to that question, which is, do you have that information in terms of the percentage of exempt properties by county to be able to understand how much is?
Ms. Ireland?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Birch, I just completed an analysis. I could provide you with all the exempt parcels in every county, if that would be at all helpful to you. Generally, we are approving a part of a long approval process of every levy rate. We know that exempt information. Because we are not able to gather the data as far as what a current assessed value of all those exempt parcels would have been if they were taxable at this time, it's difficult to calculate the delta between what that would look like if there were no exemptions versus our current state with having exempt parcels. I don't know if that helps answer your question. If maybe you could clarify for me if I could be more helpful.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Ireland. Representative Birch and Representative Gannon, thank you for the questions. I hate to get too far out from the weeds, but we'd like to finish the presentation and maybe hold that for a minute unless it relates to this slide. Are we?
It's hard to hold questions.
We good?
That's fine. I'd follow up with you later anyway.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ireland.
Thank you, Chairman. This slide actually specifies all this type of districts, taxing districts that we have in Idaho. And we're looking at the cumulative sum of the budgets of all of the various districts, looking at 23 to 24 plus a % change. This slide does account for any property tax relief measures applied to the school districts from 292 and 521, but not the homeowners tax credit relief. The reason why is because the property tax relief afforded from these two bills to the school districts paid down the supplementals and bond payments, and so the property tax levy rates from those schools were reduced as they were calculated, as opposed to the homeowner tax relief credit that occurred after levy rate calculations. So the credit was applied to the individual tax bills after levy rates were completely quantified at that level. So what you're looking at here is basically the property tax as levied throughout Idaho by the various districts. And you can see here that the total property tax levied in Idaho in 2024 was about $2.2 billion. Okay, and when we're talking about taxing districts' budgets, I wanted to demonstrate the magnitude of those budgets for you. Looking at this frequency distribution, we can see to the far left, that's the vast majority of taxing districts' budgets in Idaho are less than $25,000. So that's their total property tax budget is less than $25,000. Second group, between $25,000 and $75,000, we have another 175 of the 980 taxing districts that levied property taxes in Idaho. So it is important to note that statewide, we have about 1,114 taxing districts. Of that 1,114, 980 levied property taxes. So not all taxing districts did levy property tax in 2024. Okay, the property tax use, again, we see schools utilized about 20% of the total property tax in Idaho. We could look at the counties utilized about 29% of the total property tax, cities 30%, and all others, that remaining 21% is broken down by highway districts, fire, junior college, ambulance, libraries, and the other districts that were noted in the previous slide. Here is the property tax growth of Idaho over a number of years dating back to 2004. That top line are the schools. So we can see here with that school line, it drops dramatically in 2006. Just again for review, that's when, of course, the school maintenance and operations budgets were removed from property tax. Once that occurred, the market sadly crashed in 2008 to 10. School districts started reaching out to voters to get voter-approved funds at that point in time, and you can see that trend line continuing to go from that point forward, increase that point forward. So looking at, that was the total property tax in Idaho. Here we're looking, I'm going to break it down now between non-exempt and exempt funds. So non-exempt funds, again, are those funds, generally the maintenance, general operations funds of taxing districts. They are not exempt from the limitations found in statute 63802 as far as how much their budgets can increase from one year to the next. So they are constrained by statutory measures. So the top two lines there are cities and counties. You could see that dip around 2020. That was federal funds that came in for COVID relief. And then property taxes continue to increase. In this, because this slide is demonstrating non-exempt funds, now that the maintenance and operations of schools have been removed off of the property tax, that bottom line, very, very bottom, that's our schools. So there are virtually no non-exempt funds in schools. Once we transition to exempt funds, now exempt funds being defined as those funds that are not limited by 802, section 63802, they are voter approved funds, and because they are voter approved, it really is based on the ballot and what the district is looking at. This top line here is exclusively schools, and we can see overall the schools have, of course, the lion's share of all exempt funds through bonds and temporary and permanent supplementals. The bottom blue line there is all other taxing districts. And looking again at school exempt funds, we could look at the 2024 total pie of exempt funds, if you will. Schools make up about 92.5% of all exempt funds, again, voter approved funds that are not limited by statutory increases. The remaining 7.5%, 23 million, that's broken down by those taxing districts that you see on the side there, cities, fires, counties, community infrastructure districts, libraries, and all others. So I did mention that earlier on, before 2000, school districts really weren't reaching out to voters often for additional supplements. But then once the market did crash in 2008, really went down because of that housing crisis, sales tax started to wane as far as collections statewide. And so then the school district reached out to voters to supplement their revenue sources. So the blue line on the left is the dollars levied through exempt funds, and the red line on the right-hand side there is the total number of districts that were reaching out to voters for voter-approved funds. So statewide, we have 115 school districts, and you can see the count on the right-hand side there. During the 2016, 2018 years, we were above 90 of the total of 115 school districts that were reaching out to their voters. These are generally for short-term supplementals, 1 to 2 years, and these two graphs are reflective of all of the relief dollars received from 292 and 521. So we can see as those trend lines drop precipitously in 23 and 24 because of that relief. So who's paying property tax in Idaho? Again, as we mentioned earlier, we have the primary residential property owner there with that blue bar. If we combine that with the other residential, we're looking at above 70% of all property taxes paid by the residential sector. Commercial comes in at 24.6. Agricultural land, 1.6% of all property taxes in the state of Idaho, where mining and timber properties are paying 0.2%. And all utility companies, again, those electric utilities, railroads, barge lines, pipelines, are paying 2.1% of the overall property tax in Idaho. Again, to concentrate on the primary residential sector, new information in this slide is just looking at all taxable value again. So all residential is greater than 75% of all value in Idaho is in the residential sector. Specifically to that primary homeowner, we're looking at 46% of all value in Idaho in 2024 was primary residential property. So this slide is basically a graph looking at rates of change. So in this graph, the blue bars are the average rate of change of assessed value from one year to the next. So a large blue bar, of course, means a large quantity of increase in value. The orange bar here is showing a rate of change of tax associated with the primary residential sector from one year to the next. So we could see back in 2011, certainly values were going down because of the housing crisis, and property taxes were quite minimal at that time as well. Value started to increase in 2017. And the point of this slide is to really show that there is not a one-to-one relationship between value increase and the quantity of your tax bill, especially for the residential sector. Residential sector is taking the lion's share of value and paying the lion's share of tax. But again, that relationship between value and tax is not one-to-one. Because we are satisfying the budgets of those districts and budgets are constrained, value is just that denominator. It's just applying that equalized rate across all sectors that are paying to that district. Where it really becomes obvious is when we're looking at 21, 22, and 23. So that's when we saw that grand increase in value throughout Idaho, starting in 2021. Notice that the tax bar is not, that rate of change is not equal to the value rate of change. Again, we're just trying to satisfy that budget. Sadly, because residential has that lion's share of value, there will be tax shifting towards the residential side because commercial and the other sectors are not keeping up with the same rate of change that residential is receiving. Certainly in 2022, there was that huge $110 billion that came into Idaho in assessed value. And again, the tax quantity did not follow suit. So the point of this slide, again, is just to show that that is not a one-to-one relationship in those two variables. We spoke about foregone just briefly. Here is the total amount of foregone that taxing districts have reserved over the many years. So that top line is all taxing districts. Again, this was a quantity of budget capacity that those taxing districts had every right to levy for, but they chose not to. So they chose to lower their budgets and reserve that for a future use. So the latest year I have in this graph is 2022. At that time, we had greater than $140 million in reserved foregone. Counties are the second line below there, cities below that, and then all other taxing districts as well. Okay, and when we look at Idaho in relation to our neighboring states, this again is based on census data. The latest data, again, 2022, 100% would be the national average in this slide. And we could see here that Idaho is much less than any of our neighbors and certainly significantly lower than the national average. And if we look at that tax burden regarding property tax a little more for the folks in Idaho, when we look at the variables of property tax based on dollars of income, one being the highest in the union, Idaho ranks 45th. So we are paying property tax 35.5% below the national average. If we look at that, the variable based on per capita, Idaho again ranks 45th. And again, on this strata, we're looking at 44.7% below the national average. So if I transition to the final numbers from House Bill 292 and House Bill 521, they are as follows. So again, the School District Facilities Fund, due to House Bill 292, they did receive about $107 million. That school district relief monies was to pay down the temporary supplementals and bonds. So if a school district did not have those, then those funds were to go into a reserve account for future capital improvements. So of that money, 97.7 was to pay down property tax payments for property owners in Idaho by paying off the bond payments and temporary supplementals. By House Bill 521, that increased up to $128 million. The homeowner tax relief in House Bill 292 was almost $200 million. In 2024, that did go down because of the surplus eliminator. There wasn't as much surplus then, so that went down to $117 million. The third program in House Bill 292 was the additional tax relief. That provided some property tax relief to all parcels within counties. That program was eliminated in 521, and those funds were then redistributed to the homeowner tax relief and the school district facilities fund. And if we break House Bill 292 down a little bit further, we look in 2023 without relief, property taxes statewide would have been $2.26 billion. With House Bill 292, the relief that was afforded to homeowners, school districts, and all other parcels, the homeowner tax relief monies paid down that total property tax by 9%. The school district facilities fund additionally paid down total property tax by an additional 4%. And then the additional tax relief was an additional 1%. In 2024, looking at House Bill 521, total property taxes statewide would have been $2.32 billion without any relief. With the relief afforded from House Bill 521, that total property tax quantity went down by 5% due to the homeowner tax relief and an additional 6% due to the school district facilities fund. Okay, my final two slides are just sharing longstanding property tax relief programs that we do have here in Idaho. And of course, the first one is our circuit breaker program. This is a income restricted program for older Idahoans, perhaps disabled Idahoans, widows, widowers, and that could provide a $1,500 tax credit, up to $1,500 property tax credit for those eligible applicants. So additionally, with the income restriction, in 2025, you can't earn more than $37,810 to qualify for the program. Also, your home cannot be valued greater than 200% of the county median assessed value of parcels receiving the homeowner's exemption. Also, your house cannot be greater than $400,000 or $400,000, one of the two variables. Applicants must apply annually with their local county assessor by April 15th. Additionally, we do have the 100% service-connected disabled veterans program. There's no income test for the disabled veterans program, and that could also afford a $1,500 credit for those who qualify. In 2023, we had 25,371 approved claimants for the circuit breaker and disabled vets program. That equated to about an average of $952 in tax relief to each claimant, to a total cost to the state of Idaho of $24 million. Excuse me. This program, again, is, of course, state funded. There's no loss of revenue to the underlying taxing districts for folks receiving circuit breaker monies. This is not an exemption, so there is no tax shifting to other people within those taxing districts, and this is not subject to repayment. Our last program, my last slide here, is to talk about the property tax deferral program. This was created in 2006. This does require equity in the home. This is very similar to a reverse mortgage, if you will. So this is income restricted as well. In 2025, you could earn no more than $60,170 to qualify for the program. And the deferral does last as long as the claimant lives in their home and does not have to be repaid until the property is sold. So there is an interest rate to the loan for those who are in the program, and that interest rate in 2024 was 6%. In 2024, we had 27 households apply for the deferral program. We had 11 households approved, to a total cost to the state of Idaho of $18,344 in benefits. That concludes my program. Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to stand for any questions.
You did an amazing job. Thank you for the information. We do have some questions. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Ms. Ireland, thank you for being here today. So just getting back to exemptions, and so I'm clear how they would work. Take a big one. As I understand it, there's a company that has been inquiring about a $4 billion data center. Could you comment on that? How that would work if the company brought a $4 billion data center to a location in Idaho? And that'd be a $4 billion investment. How would that work property tax-wise for that company?
Ms. Ireland?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, my understanding of a $4 billion investment, if it was within one company, within one county in the state of Idaho, they would be afforded the ability to apply to the local county for the 634502 investment property tax exemption, if you will. And so that exemption with a $1 billion investment within one county over a investment period of 84 months, if they invested that $1 billion, they would be capped at an assessed value of $400 million.
Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And so the $4 billion investment would be paying on 10% of its value then at the end of the day.
Ms. Ireland.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Other questions? Representative Hill.
Yes, Chairman, I had a question on the disabled vet. Is it 100% disabled to get the, or is it 80%, 70%, or any of that?
Ms. Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Hill, we have the 100% service-connected disabled program that provides a $1,500 credit. Other veterans that may have a lesser degree of disability are always welcome to apply for the circuit breaker program.
Thank you.
Representative Raymond.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm curious, this information is so valuable. Is these slide decks available to the committee members? Is it possible we could get those?
It's on your OneDrive, but go ahead, Ms. Ireland.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, Representative Raymond. I provided that to Mr. Douglas earlier this morning, and he provided it to everyone in your OneDrive. You're welcome to do with it as you please. If you have any further questions, please reach out when it's convenient for you, and I'd be happy to walk you through it.
Thank you. Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
so my bad for not knowing that, but my next question or follow-up question would be, and I think you just answered it, we can share it like with our local elected officials. I think it's very valuable information to everyone.
Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Representative Raymond, please do. Everything that we do in property tax is, of course, public information. I hold no secrets. So please share it well.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Yes.
Could we go back to slide number 21 for just a second?
Slide 21, okay. Ms. Ireland.
Appears to be an anomaly in the year 2023. Could you just explain that anomaly for us, please? Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Ms. Ireland.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Raymond, great question. So in 2023, certainly we had the passage of House Bill 292. And so with that large quantity of property tax relief afforded to homeowners, again, we're looking here at the primary residential sector, the homeowners are the ones paying the lion's share of property taxes statewide. So in the receipt of $200 million in property tax relief from House Bill 292, property tax payment, that rate of change dropped significantly in the amount of property taxes that primary residential homeowners paid that year from 2022. So again, that orange bar shows a rate of change from the previous year. So with the passage and the infusion of that property tax relief through the homeowner tax relief credit, property taxes in 2023 went down dramatically for homeowners.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, committee. Just a reminder that floor session does start at 11. We are going to end this meeting in 5 minutes, so if you can wrap this up, that would be amazing. Representative Gannon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And last question, Ms. Ireland. So Micron is going to invest $15 billion in their new facility. How will that work property tax-wise?
Ms. Ireland?
Mr. Chairman, Representative Gannon, I have spoken with the county on that, and my understanding is that the second plant of Micron is a separate LLC, if you will. It's under the ownership of Triton. I believe that will be purchased later by the Micron parent company. I may be completely wrong, so I'm sorry that I'm sharing so much, but that is my understanding, that it is a separate plant. Therefore, they will be capped at $400 million. You have the existing Micron plant capped at $400 million, then you will have the second phase capped at $400 million.
And last question. Thank you, Ms. Ireland. Representative Birch.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I was a little bit late, so I apologize if this question was already covered. and then I did have one other small question as well. What would the tax exemption be for homeowners if we did not have on average, if we did not have the $125,000 cap?
Ms. Ireland.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Birch, great question. I do quantify that every October when I receive third quarter data. I believe for 2025, it would be $238,324.
Okay. And one very last question, if I may, which may be referred to, and this is not a property tax question, but one thing that I've been trying to learn is how much money each county puts into the general fund versus how much they take out of the general fund. And is this something that the Idaho State Tax Commission could help me be able to find out or determine?
Ms. Ireland, if you have that information offhand, if you need to report back, you can do a sidebar with.
Yeah, I don't expect the answer here now. I just wanted to know if you had that information or where I might be able to.
Ms. Ireland.
Mr. Chairman and Representative Birch, I don't know that we do, but I certainly could look into it, and I'd be happy to talk with you about that later.
And would the tax commission be the right place to maybe have that conversation?
Property tax or a local tax? Excuse me, Mr.
Yes.
Chairman, Representative Birch. Property tax being a local tax, we do review levy rates, and we do look at quite a bit of an analysis on taxes. We could reach out to the counties and try and quantify that.
Thank you very much. Ms. Ireland, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Again, amazing information in committee. We certainly encourage you to look on your OneDrive, become familiar, and share it with your constituents. I'm sure we get lots of questions regarding property tax. I did fail to excuse our noble chairman, Chairman Cannon, and would like the minutes to reflect that he is excused. With that, this meeting stands adjourned. Thank you.
This bill, I think, it puts a stake in the ground that says we have a sovereign right to protect what's ours.